About 1965, I was about 3 months along with my first child, and Mickey and I were living with my grandmother, and a friend of his from Michigan gave him a car which was just a bundle of rust. And I don't remember what the purpose of our trip was this particular day, but our church had fizzled out, so we were just kind of, I guess he might have been looking for a job, I don't know, but we went about 50 miles north of Seattle to Bellingham, Washington, and on the way there the car broke down, so we had to get a hotel room while the car was being fixed, and there was a little storefront church down the street from the hotel. So we just happened to stop in there that evening for something to do, and an evangelist, Ray Bradley, was preaching in this little storefront church. They became acquainted, and the next thing we knew, Ray had invited us to come and preach for him in his church in Winnipeg, Manitoba. So we still didn't have a functioning car, but we got back to Seattle, and Mickey was doing some services for one of our old friends in Everett, Washington, which is a little north of Seattle. And her son-in-law was coming out to the meetings, and we had these meetings in Winnipeg scheduled, but no way to get there. So
this must be the car that Dad said ran like a dog. It was always leaning to one side, and you could see you could see straight through from the headlight to the tail light.
That was the first car.
You know how dogs run out of the
So we were in this meeting, and the next day we were at this lady pastor's house, and her son-in-law came over, and he says, Mickey Mingo, because he was preaching about women being allowed to minister, and he didn't like it. So he says, Mickey, I don't like you, and I don't like what you're preaching. And then he began to cry, and he said, but the Lord told you to give you my car. So this man had a 56 Lincoln, and he gave Mickey that car, and that car took us from Seattle to Winnipeg, Manitoba, back and forth a couple of times until after Ruth was born in South Dakota. We traveled, that meeting turned into 2 years of evangelistic revival, itinerant preaching from that time on. So we would be in a different church every week or every 2 weeks. The Lord moved in a great way in Manitoba, in Winnipeg, and we were in that church for about 6 weeks preaching every night. So God really met us in that place. Brother Ray Bradley was a very sweet man, and really wanted to see God move in a great way. And so anyway, that car was the blessing of the Lord and the transportation for our ministry for quite a while. And then after my daughter was born, we were back in Ray Bradley's church in Winnipeg, Manitoba. And he was trying to open some doors for Mickey, and he says, I know these farmers that are in Canistino, Saskatchewan. That was about, let me see, might have not have been Canistino. I think Canistino is up north in Saskatchewan, but in a town in Saskatchewan. He said, I've been down there to preach, and they didn't give me anything. So He says, but if you want to go down there and preach, you know, who knows what might happen. So because we needed meetings for the next couple of weeks, Mickey packed us up and we went down there. Ruth was 4 weeks old. And the upshot of that was that those men fell in love with what God did in their area. These were farmers who surveyed their land with an airplane and had huge grain farms,
In the prairies.
farms in the prairies of Canada. And they took my husband to Minot, North Dakota, and bought him a new car.
Hmm.
So that little Chevy 2 took us on for the next 2 years as we traveled back and forth across the country, from one coast to the next, preaching.
Praise the Lord.
So when we stopped, Ruth was about 2 years old.
If you don't mind me asking, is the story I've heard, and I'd like to hear from start and finish, is it happened to Pastor Ruth. You said she was prayed for by A.A. Allen.
She was an infant in arms, and we were in Baltimore, Washington, holding meetings for a sweet little lady pastor there. And he was at the end of his ministry, really. He was holding some meetings in a auditorium somewhere. And we went down there and we sat on the front row. There weren't very many people there. So when he left, he had to walk past us to get out of the building. And he stopped and Mickey introduced himself and he looked at Ruth and he picked her up. He said, she's a beautiful little girl, and blessed her. So I knew A.A. Allen's ministry from the time I was a young teenager. My grandmother went to all of his meetings when he was in Seattle.
And for those of you who are listening to this video, my Pastor Ruth became so gifted in music, and we believe very much that it was from that prayer, from that prophetic blessing, came all of the great music that Ruth would produce and God would give her throughout the years. So, yes. And I know this is emotional for Pastor Ruth, but Pastor Ruth, we love you. And I'm hoping that those who are watching will enjoy these videos. So we'll be back.